Good evening from Delhi, and I must say that I'm very happy to be joining you all today, this evening. I'm really looking forward to others also who are going to speak. And it's extremely important to emphasize on the Asian view of ecofeminist understanding of the movements going on throughout the world. I will today try and resituate the discourse that is going on in terms of in the context of Indian discourse, because that is what is required today. Let me just begin by saying that, since you mentioned that I work with the Herbert Marcuse Society scholars, Marcuse, towards the end of his intellectual life, acutely realized that capitalism was not only destroying human lives by commodifying labor, whereas labor basically is a creative, sensuous value that can actually transform human life towards a better life, and so on and so forth. It is also destroying nature in the same way that it is devaluing nature's value in our lives, the role of art in our lives, women's aspirations and their lives, and the commodification of their labor and invisibilization of their labor. So he actually, created a framework. But the thinking that there can be an eco-feminist thinking, that there can be a earth thinking, was also simultaneously developing. As far as in the West, I mean to say, but in our Asian context, we always had a very different kind of relationship with nature. I mean, at least in India, in the context of India, I can say that Sankhya philosophy talked about and philosophized basically the creative and creative power of nature, to the extent that it inhered within itself the masculine principle. That is to say, if you want to think in a cosmological sense, the unity of nature and Purush, Prakriti and Purush, was not in any kind of contradiction, but it was actually governed by, or it was inherent within the nature of Prakriti to procreate, to conserve, to beautify, to run, to perpetuate human life, the life of other creatures. It is for this reason that there was a lot of respect for female forms of divinity, lot of respect for nature in terms of worshipping trees, worshipping the river Ganga, all kinds of rivers and mountains. They were all divinized basically, and there was no feeling of alienation from anything that was there in the system, the ecosystem. All of us were part of the same order, and we functioned according to our own path and our own aspirations. But this view could not become the view of, I should say there was a split between those who began to govern this tract of land, Asian tract, and those who led their lives in harmony with nature. And in particular, I would say that there is a very important role in this split that took place between nature and human life, was because of the Western colonization, particularly British colonization, because India was colonized by Britain. And when we say colonization, what we mean is that incursion of the logical, economic incursion of capitalist logic of production that was very new, very different from how people thought about process of reproduction and production in our parts of the world. So capitalism basically was based on this view of modernity, where you actually see the world as different from you as an individual. The split or the separation between objective and subjective world was so acutely central to the modern view of Western time and Western life that it was a kind of a, basically it ended with a fair amount of destructive logic into our context. And here I would like to talk a little bit about Vandana Shiva, since I've mentioned her name in the abstract that I've sent you. That, and I think rightly so, because, you know, the initial article that she wrote on colonialism and the evolution of masculinist forestry in India, this particular understanding unfolds in a very sensible manner, because colonialism basically colonized our forests first before they colonized our minds. Basically, it's like prioritizing something so destructive to nature, and because nature to them was not meaningful. It was like it was governed by mechanical laws, you know, and it didn't have any sensibility of its own or sensitivity of its own, as if it was not alive. It was like a machine, and it had certain kind of objectivity, which could very easily be understood by the modern methods or science, or positivistic methods of science. And there was no problem. Whereas, in fact, there was a deep problem in objectifying nature in the way that they did, based on the strength of modern science and its methodologies that they thought was extraordinarily progressive and a mark of their superiority. So she begins by saying that when the British colonized India, they first colonized her forests. Ignorant of their wealth and of the wealth of knowledge of local people to sustainably manage the forest, they displaced local rights, local needs, and local knowledge, and reduced this primary source of life into a timber mine. So you can see the logic of Caroline Marchant's book, Death of Nature, over here. It was the instinct, it was the practice and process of death that also entered into our context with the coming of colonization of our forests, cutting of our trees, not realizing that trees were not alone, that they were part of host of life, not only of human beings, but of various kinds of other species of creatures which lived in the forest. And not only that the forest actually was the source of life. It allowed so many kinds of lives to be sustained, to be perpetuated, and so on and so forth. She goes on by saying that women's subsistence economy based on the forest was replaced by the commercial economy of British colonialism. Teak from Malabar was extracted for the King's Navy, and the sal of central India and the conifers of the Himalayas were exploited for the railway system. Although it is always local people who are held responsible for deforestation, it is always it is commercial demands that have more frequently resulted in large-scale forest destruction. We can even take this kind of relationship that we developed, which was one of aggression, of murderous aggression with colonialism, by showing the same insensitivity to the people and local knowledge, or knowledge of the people, which they used to live their lives in a meaningful way. You know, because of this insensitivity towards our land, towards our culture, towards our forest, and also towards our people, that there was no sense of economy that was used in any sensitive manner, like the destruction of the forest was not felt by them as destruction because they saw it as serving the industrial purpose of their own economies, their own countries. And if they needed 100 trees, they would cut 200 trees. That is to say, this insensitivity resulted in a huge amount of wastage also. So this wasting of nature was not hurtful to them, but it was very hurtful to us. She quotes one of the officers who was preparing the gazetteer of that period with British imperialism. According to Atkinson's gazetteer, the forests were denuded of good trees in all places. The destruction of trees of all species appeared to have continued steadily and reached its climax between 1855 and 1861, when the demands of the railway authorities induced numerous speculators to enter into contracts for sleepers, for the railways, and their men were allowed unchecked to cut down old trees very far in excess of what they could possibly export, so that for some years after the regular forest operations commenced, the department was chiefly busy cutting up and bringing to the depot the timber left behind by the contractors. In fact, it's amazing that some of their officers basically wondered as to why the forest was not used by these people, why there was so much forest still in India. Little did they realize that it was always used. It was simply not destroyed because people lived in harmony with nature, and nature for them was alive, was a source of life. It had emergent powers. It was conscious. I mean, you would know that Indian scientist Jagdish Chandra tried to prove that trees had life, plants had life, because they did not believe that these were alive things. So they simply wondered as to why the forest was not used. But in the consciousness of deep ecologists in the West, this thing appeared that colonialism was not only a mission of educating people of India to transition to modernity, but that it was deeply annihilating, deeply hurtful to the entire sense of life, the entire sense of being. The cosmology was being squashed. So one of the important writers or the participants of the movement of deep ecology also acknowledges, which I want to also quote this particular thing, so that you realize that the parallel things were going on in the Western part of the world. On the one side, you had the logic of productivist logic of capitalism, industrializing the West particularly, and you had an opposition. There's a dialectical movement was going on, realizing that it was not serving the kind of purpose that it was short-sighted on the part of colonizers to destroy nature in this particular way, particularly in colonies. So Plumwood writes that master model of egoism, is the philosophy, egoism, individualism, atomism, all of that, bourgeois ideologies of capitalism. The master model of egoism and instrumentalism, in which the system of class, gender, and colonial oppression have heavy and connected investment, has been immensely influential in shaping the way the human relations to nature has been conceived in the West. The dominant tradition of Western culture have viewed relationships to plants, rivers, animals, places, and ecosystems as entirely instrumental, and defined human relation to others in nature in the same terms as the egoist defines his relation to others human stand up apart from nature, conceived as a means of satisfy essentially self-contained human interest. So that this kind of dominance, which had convinced the colonialists that being insensitive to nature, being exploitative of nature, being violative of nature was important to make progress. Given this, Vandana Shiva, Medha Patkar, a number of women who led movements against this kind of relationship that we formed with the system of production, that is to say, capitalism. I would be very happy to mention a few things about Chipko movement, because this movement is very well known everywhere in the world. But also we had a number of other movements in south part of India, in the eastern part of India, particularly the declaration by British authorities at that time, colonial government at that time, to appropriate land which was not used for the purposes of industrial production. And that big tracts of land was called wasteland. This is also something that we have to understand. As I said in the beginning, that there was nothing in nature that was not used. If it was not used by human beings, it was used by other species. It was used by animals living in the forest. It was used by animals that were dependent on various kinds of products of forests. Water system was maintained by these forests and the wastelands. So the organic nature of how life was woven into the land, the earth, the mountains, and rivers and all that was simply not felt, because it was a pulsating live thing. And the bigger thinkers of India, for example, had already said that Prakriti is an active principle. It is life, it shapes life, it runs life, it perpetuates life, it reproduces life. In fact, women themselves were very much representative of how Prakriti functions in a subtle way. The reproductive capacities of women, the conserving activities in which conservation activities in which they involve themselves. All of that was quite representative of how nature itself was working. Coming to just before I discuss Chipko movement, I would like to mention certain books that have appeared now. For example, Vidut Mohanty has written a book called Lakshmi the Rebel. The goddess herself, the Lakshmi herself, was seen in many parts of our country as preserving seeds, as saving diversity, allowing people to live the ways in which they want to live. There was not one way of living. Diversity is also very important. It is also a very feminine principle against masculinity as some universalizing, unifying things. Killing diversity means you actually want to kill a system of life. See, it's very important to understand that everything is not production of goods. Everything is not commodity. Everything is not market. There are values of things that are outside the value that the modern economy has created. Like, for example, exchange value of commodities, by which you actually value things that you produce. Exchange value and use value, the two kinds of values recognized even by Marxist thinkers and Marx himself. But today we talk about green value. Women have been always involved in creating value, which now we want to call as green value. And some Marxist thinkers, dialectical thinkers, have also emphasized that there is a value that hasn't got a relationship and that cannot be defined by market. It's an intrinsic value. Green value is an intrinsic value dependent on this cosmological understanding that everything is intrinsically valuable. Grass is valuable. trees are valuable, rivers are valuable. Various kinds of invisible creatures living within and under the earth are visible. Now we are studying and we know how each and everything is, every kind of species is working. No species is idle. Everyone is working to sustain the system in which we live. It's an ecosystem, organic thing. If you can't see, your philosophy does not allow you to see, does not mean that it does not exist and that you objectify things. So women in particular in India, and I'm sure it is also true for the entire Asian context, they always knew that they have to work, that their tasks are not assigned by the market, their tasks are assigned by their lives themselves. Like the nature itself has assigned her very important role and work to give birth to perpetuate the human species, to take care, to nurture. These are the things that were simply devalued because it was only the productive, the commodified object that was produced for the market was valuable. It was the only thing, the productive value of commodity was the only thing that this industrializing modern economy of capitalism valued. But there are other kinds of values. So a lot of feminists also argue that, you see, until unless you also value of women's labor, you also put similar emphasis on use value of things, on value of reproductive labor and domestic labor, you will not be able to make way and see that there is another value that has not been captured by anybody, but without which nothing can move, is the green value. And today, the Western philosophers of a different order, whom we call post-human, they have come back to understanding and realization that nature is live and pulsating, that there is a kind of a super spirit that informs things that we objectify, or we call it objectively neutral or mechanical. So, for example, Deleuze's lecture, the post-human feminists and quantum physics feminists, there is a whole lot of feminist science that is developing now, which is quantum physics. They all have come to realize that value is something, that value is live, is worth valuing, which is intrinsic to things that are there in the world, and which have dynamism and a power to be emergent. After all, even as negligent thing as grass, self-produces itself, doesn't it? It grows. It has not actually disappeared from the earth. Of course, if we want to kill it, we can kill it. We have the power now. But you must philosophize from this perspective. So in Chipko movement, when the large parts of the entire forest world ecosystem in India was brought under the authority of the colonial rule at the time through acts, 1865, then in 1870s and all that. Slowly and gradually, when they began to take over the forest, they began to cut the trees. And the trees, for them, for the industrial purposes, was not something that was live, it was timber. So the diversity of the forest became an obstacle in the way of the telos of industrialization of this part of the world. So only teak would be required, so we plant teak trees. All the other trees that were very, very important for even for the teak trees to survive were sort of considered as waste, as it was not a biomass, it had no value. So the degradation of forestry in India is something that ecofeminists in India have examined very, very carefully, because there is a clue as to how we can go ahead in future. Like, Marcuse says that we have to rehumanize our future and learn from the dehumanization of the past. So there is a thing of, I'm not a post-humanist kind of a thinker. I'm very much a eco-socialist feminist thinker, and I think that rehumanization requires that there's a limit to exploitation of nature. There's a limit to degradation and exploitation of women's labor. It is ultimately destructive of everything, because we are all interconnected. That is where I'll also bring quantum consciousness. Karen Barad, whom I respect quite a bit, and Deti, and Donna Haraway, all of them have come to argue against the old notion of science, and they are saying that here is the future where we have quantum understanding, in which absolutely discusses this with great clarity, that everything is interconnected. This consciousness is in the background, everything existing even in isolation. That is to say, duality and non-duality are not something in contradiction. It's a matter of where we cut, how we cut the bedsheet of the universe to exist. But that is not the end and all thing about human beings. There is so much more to be done, to be achieved, to be understood, that this openness is very important. So today we have a discourse, but women in, say, 70s living in the mountains of India, who opposed felling down of trees, because they had become timber and pulp. They were not living species. They said that our lives are equal to lives of these trees, which the contractors are going to cut down. And not only that, they said that our lives are because of the trees. Trees are the source of our lives, in very material sense as well, because it was giving them everything. They were source of their food, the source of their leisure, the source of the life forms of the people living there. So Chipko movement is a very big awakening and learning. From 1970s onwards, this movement has allowed Indian feminists to not only claim the indigenous philosophical resources that we have, but also the material resources of forests and lands and agriculture and all the science and technology that India is using, and this criticism is by ecofeminists today in this country.
Dr. Singh, kindly take note, you have 3 minutes to conclude your presentation.
All right, so I thought maybe you were asking me to conclude. So what I'm going to say is that I'm going to add another dimension to the eco-feminist consciousness. It is not only the survival of human species and survival of other species that they are worried about. They are afraid that kind of human consciousness that had begun to appreciate not only life, but good life, beautiful life, that has also come under serious threat. After all, human beings developed themselves through sensuous labor, of course, employment of sensuous labor, but they also created great art. They created literature. They created all forms of life that took its enjoyment, its beauty from the aesthetic part of their lives as well. So you will see that nature was a big inspiring force in romantic movements, in literature and in painting, in art, and in India also. In Hindi literature, Chayawad was in 1930s. It developed. It was, I think, one of the best periods as far as the appreciation of nature was concerned in poetry, since I'm from this background also. And I myself have been writing on nature, and nature not on in an objective sense, but life generally. What is a woman's life, and how much appreciation women feel when they are close to nature. In my latest collection, I should say, Vasana, ek Nadi ka naam hai, which is about feminine desire. And I've tried to show in this book that feminine desire basically is desire of nature to live beautifully, to live in communion with others. And this desire is not illegal. This desire should not be, the object of this desire is not love for men only, this masculinist egoism. This desire is for the entire system, entire universe to live in harmony with women and other creatures. So I would say that ecofeminism in India is a at the moment the most important feminist movement that I can think of in terms of writing, in terms of how ordinary women are resisting system which is destroying ecology, which is destroying our climate, it's destroying our sense of feeling happy, pleasurable uh, by the attributes of nature. So I would say that it's a different, completely different cosmology that we are going for. Since capitalism has intervened, I wouldn't say that we can go back because history does happen, but certainly we can reimagine our humanity. And at the moment, it's very difficult to say how it is going to be. But on the basis of what we have suffered and what we are suffering, that is to destruction of life and its various forms, we can say that there is going to be a big cosmological alteration in terms of how human beings now think of their survival and their flourishing. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Would like to entertain a few questions to our distinguished speaker. I've yet to read one in the chat. Dr. Singh, to begin the brief Q&A, I just want to find out, for a religiously diverse society such as India, how does it interplay with ecofeminism, with the concept of ecofeminism?
So, as I defined ecofeminism, it is not only about just nature, but everything else that is connected with it. In India, for millennia, we've had movements to save lives of other creatures. Vegetarianism has been a very important part. There's a Vishnoi community in India which does not allow animals to be killed. All right. In fact, the first Chipko movement that started about 300 years ago, before 1971, which started in the Advani and all these villages of central Indian hills, where she actually gave her life to these people who had come to cut trees from the forest where she was living for the for the for the king of that area, Rajasthan. She gave up her life. What I mean to say is that this intrinsic uh, importance that women have assigned to nature by way of divinizing it, by way of preserving it in various ways, has been in India continuously going on. It has never been stopped. Apart from the colonial administration that came with absolutely objectifying um, and selfish, egoistic management of production process and production logic, it has never happened in India that this kind of split has taken place between uh, men, women, and other species and nature. It has not happened. So wherever you want to look, you will find that this universal respect for nature, for life, uh, is there in the most ordinary women you find. There are various kinds of fasts at the key. There are various ways of showing, manifesting their their renewal of the relationship with nature. It goes on forever in this country.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for that answer. I understand our ARC Secretary, Mr. Raiko, has a question from one of our participants. Go ahead, Sir Kenneth.
Good evening, Dr. Singh. Good evening from Manila. There's one question from our participant. The question is, how can women in India help reinforce green values in present-day Indian society? Thank you for the...
Yeah, first of all, I just hinted that women in India want first of all, they want to be valued themselves. They want their labor to be valued. Unless we show respect to things that are done for society by women, if her labor is not valued, it will be very difficult for her to show or demonstrate that it is important as to what she is saying in terms of nature. Credibility of what she has to utter is also important. So do not think that the struggle that women are undergoing in this country in terms of movements of valuation of domestic labor is separate from um, uh, the importance of ecofeminist movement. It's interconnected. So wherever it is possible, they're fighting commodification of female body, they're fighting commodification of forest, they're fighting commodification. That is to say, the intrinsic value of labor is not uh, captured just by the exchange value. It's very important that green value of our relationship with nature and things that nature gives us and that we are wasting is also important. So our discourses are very rich. I have not been able to talk about because of positive time. Chaya Dattar has written a book called Revisiting Ecofeminism in India, and a lot of wonderful work Marxist thinker Maria Amis has done with Vandana Shiva. So they frame the framework which is needed, first of all, to epistemologically place our discourse and our point of view. It's very important. It's like credibility to this particular repositioning, the uh, re uh, resurgence of new kind of feminism. I don't reject feminism because it has been essentialist in the West. It has not been essentialist here. We have lived out our nature. And if Vandana Shiva, for example, says that his nature and women are very close, there is no essentialism here. I mean, I don't suspect that. It is based on the experience of how women have lived and how they continue to live. The things that they grow. Some friends of mine, they are doing research on how millet is being grown by women in various parts of the country. The kind of grain, the diversity that was killed by the intervention of capitalism. So it's basically it's a kind of a feminist fight with capitalist system, in which inbuilt commodification, dehumanization, alienation, these kinds of processes are accompanied with its major goal, that is to create profit, make profit, through superimposing just one value over all other values of life, which is the exchange value, which basically is profit.
Thank you for that. I understand Father Michael Nugent has a question for our speaker. Father Michael, go ahead.
And also, there is this whole understanding, new vision of a green commonwealth. Vandana Shiva has written a book called The Earth Democracy. All these, theoretically, these concepts are being produced based on the path-breaking research and, cutting-edge research that we see. The Earth is reasserting herself through women's writings and women's practices. And it is not going to go just waste like it did earlier. I think it's going to be a very different scenario.
All right. Kenneth, I understand that Father Nugent has a question for our speaker.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello. Yes, Doctor. Hinduism is a major religion in India, right? So I wonder how Hinduism have impacts on ecofeminism.
So Hinduism, I wouldn't say that it is